Hello, everybody. Welcome to Good Tips for Hard Times, where we find smart people who have great advice to help you get through your days. Thank you so much for joining us. So the whole west coast of the U.S. is on fire, and I just kind of want to take a minute and acknowledge that. I know that every week there's something because this hard life that we're living these last few years, especially 2020. And as someone who's lived in California for a large portion of my life, the fires are always frightening and scary and intense, and they're just getting worse. So I hope everyone that is in these spaces, dealing with the lack of sunlight, the constant orange sky, that everyone is as safe as they can be, and that their families are safe as well. So yeah, let's do something about the climate crisis. But first, let me tell you who I am. I'm Anita Sarkeesian. I'm a media critic, public speaker, and the executive director of the Games and Online Harassment Hotline, which is an emotional support resource for people who make and play games. I'm really excited about today's conversation. We're going to be talking about moderation for friendlier communities, how to build healthier communities through actively moderating and engaging with those spaces. And our hotline advisor, Kishonna Gray, is going to be moderating this conversation today, which I'm so excited about. So Kishonna is the assistant professor in the Department of Communication and Gender and Women's Studies at the University of Illinois, Chicago. That is an enormous title. She is also a faculty associate at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University. Dr. Gray is an interdisciplinary, intersectional digital media scholar and digital historian whose area of research includes identity, performance, and online environments, embodied deviance, cultural production, video games, and Black cyber feminism. She's hardcore academic, but totally accessible in conversation, which I appreciate. And I also just want to shout out her new book, Intersectional Tech, is amazing and wonderful. And if you care about video games, you're definitely going to want to get in on reading this. Also, I may have written the foreword, but that's not why it's good. And Kishonna will be talking to Gino Grieco, who is a moderator at giantbomb.com. He's been moderating the site's chat and forums for the last 6 years, as well as organizing the site's yearly community charity stream, the Giant Bomb Community Endurance Run. He's also a freelance writer with bylines at Giant Bomb and Vice Gaming. In his spare time, he hosts a weekly video game book club podcast named Deep Listens. I am so looking forward to this conversation. Please take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Anita, for having us and for hosting this amazing podcast. I heard, your opening comments, giving shout outs like to the folks on the West Coast who are struggling right now. And we also echo that sentiment. And hopefully, folks are able to engage with this, get some respite, take a break from the heaviness of the world right now. So thank you so much for that. And Gino, thank you. Welcome. How are you, Gino?
I'm doing good.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yep. Gino Grieco is doing very well.
All right, Gino Grieco. So glad to have you. I think, one of the first places that I like to start with these conversations, we are either adjacent to games or we're in games directly, but I'm always interested in folks their origin story, how you came into the gaming space outside of the work that you do, just are you a gamer? What kinds of games do you play? Give us a little bit of a background, your relationship to games.
Yeah. So for me, gaming started probably when I was 8 or 9 years old. I got invited to one of my best friend's houses, and he told me, "Hey, do you want to check out my PlayStation?" And I thought that was a really pretentious way to describe his toy room. And he's like, no, not that. This box here is my PlayStation. And then he played Final Fantasy VII, and that was the end of it. I've been playing games ever since. My preferred games tend to be Japanese role-playing games. I've got a Cactuar and a VV back there. I'm a big FF fan, but I'll play most anything. And through the podcast, I've played a bunch of games that were outside of my original wheelhouse. So I've been playing games for 20 plus years at this point. Got into writing a little bit from blogging on Giant Bomb's community blogs. I blogged for a few years there, then became a moderator off of that and my work with the Community Endurance Run, doing the charity work. And then from that, they had a freelance program for a little while for freelance writers, pitched there. And thanks to Austin Walker, I was able to get a chance at writing and had a byline there for a little while. Had a an article on Waypoint, and then I've been moderating ever since, doing that sort of stuff. So yeah, it's been good. Been in gaming for a while.
That's awesome. You have a beautiful resume. Like you're engaged and connected like to so many things and so many industries and I think that that's like really like fascinating, especially like in the moments that we're in where, like folks, we are like thinking critically like about gaming and gaming spaces, but also thinking about like the structures that are like around it that help, create healthy like gaming spaces, right?
Yep.
And I think, you talked a little bit about, like the freelance writing that you do, like how was there like a particular pathway of how you got into doing like, a lot of like that freelance writing? Like, how did you happen to be in that space, especially for folks who are, like considering this as like a, maybe like a particular, like a path, like an outlet for them as well. How did you get into doing that?
Sure. So for freelance writing, the first thing I did was I basically for a year said, I'm going to write a blog every week and I'm just going to do it. And maybe people will watch it, maybe people will read it, maybe it'll work out, but I'm just going to do it because people keep saying on every podcast and thing that I listen to, you just got to do it. Just go out there, just put work out there, and then eventually people will recognize it, which I did build a little bit of a following on the site that way, got some front pages in the community section from that, and that kind of made me a little bit more visible. And then because of that, I got into the community stuff and got pulled into the mod team. And then when they put out a big kind of call for freelance writers, I was able to say, hey, look, I'm one of the moderators on the site. I've got this entire resume here that you can take a look at, which helped me stand out, I think, once the call went out. And that just kind of got my foot in the door. And then that allowed me to parlay that. I mean, I think that the argument that like if you're going to do a lot of hopefully good work for free for a long time, eventually someone will pay you at least a little bit to do it for them, especially if you're showing that you're getting readers and that the work is of a quality. And I also, thankfully, I studied computer science in college. So I was able to pitch some articles that were more tech focused that helped differentiate me as well. Like my first article that I wrote for them was on DDoS attacks, because at the time, Microsoft had just been hit by like one of the Xbox Live outages that have happened over the years. And so I just kind of said, hey, here's why when they say we don't know if we've been DDoS'd, maybe they're not lying. So I just kind of explained, hey, here's how DDoSs work. Here's what a distributed denial of service attack looks like. Here's why they happen all the time and they're so common. And that kind of gave me an angle that made it a little bit unique. I've done a little bit of writing there, but that gave me an in to then pitch other things.
I think that's a beautiful pathway, and I think it also illustrates like just how different these pathways can look into this field. So I often, people often like reach out and ask questions of like, hey, my kid wants to do this. What should they do? They want to do this. What should they do? And like when people respond to that, they give me all kinds of like variations of like how they got into like the field. So is there a way, since this, the podcast is, good tips, are there like some, best practices? Are there just like some general overall like good tips that you would like impart to people, especially like young folks, maybe like in high school or in college who are thinking about wanting to do this kind of work? Like, is there a trajectory that you would recommend, or any paths that you would also, advocate for?
Sure. So I think that from like a getting into it perspective, just have realistic expectations. Understand that even if you break in, like you get a byline, you do freelance work, every single pitch that you make is going to be another pitch that's going to be evaluated as though, hey, we can kind of rely on you, but we're going to evaluate this pitch on its own merits. So you need to build up that credibility. You need to build up that resume and that portfolio, but that is not a guarantee that you're going to be in a spot where even if you're firing on all cylinders, you can live off of it, or that's a thing that you can pursue wholeheartedly without having other sources of income, having other outlets to make sure that you're in a safe place. You can break in by working hard, making the right connections, making sure you don't close any doors. But even if you're firing on all cylinders and it breaks for you, it's not necessarily going to be something that can sustain you by itself, especially if you have people you're providing for. So have backup plans. Plant those seeds at all these different places where you can, but have plans on plans on plans. Because I remember before I even broke into freelance writing even a little bit, I went to a PAX panel on getting into the game industry. And I asked the question, I was in the position like, hey, so if I break in, like all of you are freelance writers, like how many of you make your living on freelance game writing? And no one raised their hand. And they were kind of the experts on getting into the industry. So I took that as my life lesson from there. Like you can get in, you can get bylines, you can have a huge influence on how this industry is talked about and how games are viewed. But even still, you got to have backup plans. You got to try and find a place where you're stable and where that hard work can turn into something that helps you keep going day to day.
No, that's fascinating. I think I'm thinking about, like the pathways into like moderation, because that's also like a big part of, what, your pathway and like your resume. Is a community moderation like a thing that people like aspire to do? Like, so I'm just thinking like, I've got kids, right? And so like if they're like, oh, what do you want to be when you grow up? I don't think that I've heard anybody say I want to be a community moderator. Like, will
That's
that
fair.
ever be like a path? Like, what's the pathway to like community moderation? Like, is it accidental, or do people, I remember like Anita just sharing like the story of like, like the moderators, like in her communities, and like how they accidentally come into this work. Like, is there a clear path, or is it that maybe people with like a particular skill set just happen into it and then they're good at it? How does that happen?
So I can tell you how it happened for me and how it happens when we're looking for future moderators. So it generally comes from the people who are outstanding members of your community one way or another, right? So folks who are going to be, if you have a flag system, like, hey, this comment's bad, flag it. If they're doing accurate flags all the time, so they're not just flagging stuff they don't agree with, if they're not flagging things that are, stuff that clearly is okay, but they're just flagging it. If they're very accurate, that's someone who, they understand what values we have. They understand that this is what's tolerated, this is what's not tolerated. We can at least trust them to understand that part. But you also want your moderators to be people who have shown devotion over years, like people who are going to be involved, whether you give them mod powers or not. You don't want someone who's going to be like, if you give them mod powers, they're going to show up and then they're going to care. And if you take it away, they're not going to be a good member of the community, or they're going to disengage. You also want people who, when they're not just using moderation, like when they're in discussion, they're a standout member of the community who's going to raise the level of discourse that's happening. Because you can find that the best way sometimes to make a comment section take a fruitful direction and have an engaged discussion instead of a shouting match can just be someone who says something meaningful and says something on topic that inspires that out of other people. Kind of moderation by addition instead of subtraction. If you set a good example, people will follow it. If you set a bad one, they won't. And so putting that little check mark or whatever, most sites usually have like, this person's a moderator. They're a representative of the site in some way. You want to make sure that those people stand out and actually do a good job, because the stuff that we remove is not the stuff that people notice, unless they were really tracking a thread or really following chat. They notice the stuff that you add because that's the stuff that's going to stay. They don't necessarily see the things you delete by design, right? So you want someone who's going to be both a positive addition with what they're saying and a standout person. So it's kind of understood like this is what a good member of the community looks like. And you also want someone who's not going to abuse their powers or do a bad job once you give them more responsibility.
Absolutely. So, and thinking about like becoming like a moderator, is being a moderator like a universal experience? So like for instance, like the moderators that are a part of like the communities that you manage and organize, do those moderators like then look different from like the moderators, for instance, like the bots in this Twitch chat? Maybe like, are there like some universal kinds of like characteristics that constitute like good moderators?
I mean, I think that most of the good moderators we have a combination of empathy for where people are coming from. You need to be able to read things in context and understand that they might be that this person might have said something that you think is uncouth, but they're coming from a place that try to give them the benefit of the doubt, right? think that maybe they're coming from a place of ignorance, or they're coming from a place where they didn't understand how something was going to be received. And so you want to come at it from that perspective, be able to step into someone else's shoes. Being incredibly online is also very helpful, because then you'll understand the current slang, the current discussions that are going on. So you'll know if a forum thread comes up, oh man, this is probably copy pasted from someplace else, or this argument's happening here, but actually it started on Twitter, and we need to know, like, hey, this beef that's happening here, it's just echoing some other discussion. So that's how I should interpret it. I shouldn't interpret it as though it, emerged wholly formed from the head of Zeus on our site. It also helps if you're kind of I think like a system-oriented or a rules-oriented thinker, someone who's like, okay, this doesn't match the letter of the law. This is clearly, we just need to get rid of it. This is an exception, but we should make the exception, to try and set up the rules of the road that the entire community is going to follow. Because if you don't do that work, then people don't know what the guidelines are. You don't want your decisions on what is okay and what is not okay to be capricious and arbitrary. So having people who are there to not only set the ground rules, but set them fairly and apply them fairly, those are the kinds of things you look for.
So give us like some specifics with that, right? So we're talking like in general, generalities, right? So give me like as specific as you can. If there was like a particular example, like in your community, and feel free to talk about, your community like specifically, and then just give us like an example of like, okay, this thing happened. This is how we responded to it. Like were there trainings that had to happen afterwards, or like how do you prep people to deal with like that in the moment, and then how do you like mitigate that like moving forward?
Yeah. So in terms of training, most of the training's done via flags, like walking people through, hey, here's what a flagged comment is. Here's what we're going to do about it, because not every single comment is going to prompt the same level of moderation. If someone just drops a word that, I can just refer to our community rules. Like we've got some words that we just don't let people use it. Like we've got a rule on no dismissive labeling. So if you call someone a social justice warrior or a neckbeard, we're just going to delete that comment. Like that's not inspiring good discussion. If you're just going to label someone, it's just going to prompt a label back or a dismissive argument. So we just said, look, this is coming up all the time. People are just throwing out a term and they're just dismissing another person. They're not even engaging with the argument. They're not making an argument themselves. Let's just say, look, certain phrases, we're just going to get rid of them. So that rule didn't always exist. So we came up with something that allowed us to, in a quick way, have a good way to say, look, this comment is out of bounds. We're going to delete it. And then that's an easy rule for new moderators to follow also, because it's basically a keyword search. Like if you've got this keyword that you're using to attack someone else, it's always out of bounds. We don't really care what the context is. It's never going to inspire good discussion. So we kind of set that up. So we've had, users who, if you're online, like those are terms that come up all the time, but we just kind of said, nah, not here, not now. So we apply those sorts of rules all the time.
Awesome. Are people on board with that? Like, do the people who want to be like a part of your communities, are they like, yes, we want to be a part of that. We will, we'll support this work. Like, or are people like resistant to that? Like you're infringing on my rights, you're trying to control me. Like tell me about the community. Like, are they on board with being good actors in this space and wanting to promote that good behavior?
Sure. By and large, yes, because the people who were not cool with it, like they don't tend to last in the community very long. Like we've set up the rules and everyone knows what the rules of the road are. Usually for most moderation, it'll be kind of a three strikes situation. Like if the first time it'll probably be a deletion, and we'll tell you to look at the rules. Second time it'll probably be a warning. You'll lose your ability to post until you read the rules and tell us you're going to follow them going forward. And then third time it might be a suspension or a ban. So usually by the time someone gets to the point where we're maybe showing them the door, they've been given multiple opportunities to get in touch with what our expectations of the standards of behavior are in our community. And they usually either get with it because they understand what the consequences will be, or they don't. We definitely, I will say, like this is my free speech, you can't delete anything I've ever written, people. Usually the first deletion, they say that, and then we're like, okay, we're not a good fit. It's not you, it's us.
Right.
That doesn't have any bearing here. Sorry. You can't be rude to someone and then just have your comment stay forever. Oops.
Right. Absolutely. We got a great question that came from, the chat. For folks who are listening, if you want to, contribute to this conversation, you absolutely can. So please, submit your questions into the chat and we'll get to it. But we've got a great question. Someone has asked about policy kit. But in addition to policy kit, they're asking if there is thinking about the capacity for communities to manage themselves differently rather than following like a standard admins mods model. So their question seems to be like these approaches seem to be like from the top down, right? Are there examples or is there space like under y'all's model in particular for like there to be like grassroots kind of like, hey, this is how we're going to govern ourselves, like kind of situation? Have you seen that? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I have not seen Policy Kit. That's new to me. But in terms of top down, bottom up, I don't have. So we kind of use a hybrid model because we've got ultimately the moderators making decisions, but we also have a flag system. So users who are seeing a comment that they don't agree with or that they think is violating the rules basically says, hey, check this out, please. So they are definitely surfacing to us more content than we would be able to peruse if we were just on the forums ourselves all the time. So it's not directly like if a certain amount of community members disagree with a comment or think it's out of bounds, we get rid of it. But I think that one of the issues that you can get with just completely grassroots moderation is brigading. People coming in, knowing what your rules are for flagging or for getting rid of comments, creating bots or creating multiple accounts, and then single-handedly driving someone's moderation past a threshold. So like that can come up too as a potential pitfall. On the upside, if you can set up a community moderation standard and system that is resilient to that sort of thing, then obviously you can kind of let your hands off the wheel and let the community handle itself. So there's definitely an appeal there. I personally feel like it's good to have someone who's accountable for the decision, just because it's so easy on the internet to create a large enough group of accounts to just kind of exert your will if you're a bad actor. And it's harder, generally speaking, to get someone into a position of moderation who's going to be a bad actor. So I think that a open source community driven thing is that's the platonic ideal, like that's what you would want. But you would need to come up with a system that doesn't allow for malicious users to figure out how the system works and then exploit it against you.
That's a great point. That's fantastic. Thanks for engaging with the comments. I think there may be a follow-up. Let me read this person's follow-up. So Policy Kit is a fairly new thing. I learned that's intended to help people evolve their own methods of moderation. And there's also an org or website. So I want to make sure, just in case, because I had never heard of like Policy Kit either. Thank you so much for participating in the chat. Another question that I wanted to ask is related to like the technologies that can help you support the work that you do. Because I'm guessing, are there particular tools that you use, some tools that can like afford you all like the ability to like do this work like more efficiently or better? Did you want to like talk about any of those kinds of things, like the technologies that you've seen or the technologies that you all use in particular?
Oh yeah, of course. So when you're moderating, you need to kind of know what's in your toolkit, right? Do you have deletion abilities? Do you have shadow bans? Do you have regular bans? Do you have suspensions? Do you have access to something identifiable to a user, like an IP address where you can tell who someone is? Do you have some way to identify an account to where you can figure out if people are making dupes, like making multiple accounts? So knowing exactly what tools you've got at hand is going to determine what kind of moderation you can do. Something that I always recommend is that you need some way to know who's done what in the past. You need a history. You need some sort of memory of who people are and what their standards are. Because if someone shows up, calls someone a terrible slur, and then by tomorrow people have forgotten about it because you've dealt with so many other moderation stuff in the day, or you lived your life and you forgot who this person was, it's easy for a bad actor to just keep simmering in the background if you don't have some way. So any site, if you're moderating it, if the site doesn't have tools built in, you can use Google Docs, you can use a Google Sheet, you can come up with some way to keep track of who the users are that have had moderation incidents, and then keep track of, hey, what did they do? Was it actually that bad? Is there a pattern forming here? Because there's a lot of ambiguity in comments sometimes. Sometimes someone could say something offhandedly, like a good one is some words in the UK are really offensive that aren't in the US. We're both English speakers, but they're saying it in a completely different context. Same thing, vice versa, UK to US. If someone says, no, I'm just from the UK, I say this word all the time, and it doesn't mean what you think it does, don't moderate me. And then weirdly enough, it just keeps getting said in a really terrible context over and over and over again. Then we can start thinking, hey, maybe you're just using this as an excuse to say stuff that we wouldn't allow under most circumstances. But if you don't have that track record and ability to look back and see what people are doing over time, you won't be able to tell that there's actually a problem here. It's not just someone's skating by.
I think that's hilariously fascinating, right? So you have to think you all have to be equipped with like all these cultural nuances too, like to know that like, okay, bloke might be an okay word for us, but bloke might not be an okay word for somebody else. I mean, I think I'm just thinking about like, it sometimes seems like an impossible task, like for moderators to have to like do all this work. And I think this goes like into like this question that we got from the Twitch chat. This person's asking about moderator burnout and having to support these folks who are doing all this extra labor, emotional labor, actual labor, digital labor, of like doing this work and then having to learn and stay up on like the latest things. Like, are there some kind of like tips or tricks or things that you all implement like to protect like your moderators or even like moderators that are out there that might not have like the structural support? How do we protect these folks?
Yeah, so something that we've done on Giant Bomb a few times is when a topic is just like requiring 100% focus, like a chat's going out of control, or there's just a lot of comments being flagged from a certain topic, we've shut down the comment section for 24 hours. Let's let people cool off over the weekend. People need a break. We'll come back to it. And usually with those breaks, it not only helps the moderators, but it also helps the discussion not just be the same 2 people or 5 people arguing back and forth because they're online at the same time. So we do things like that. We also have kind of division of labor. Some people handle wiki submissions because Giant Bomb has a wiki. Some people handle chat. Some people handle the forums. So you're not necessarily moderating the same things all the time. And that kind of helps from one person just becoming the backbone of all the moderation. You don't want one person just taking on all that. And you also have, you want systems to be built in. Hopefully, if you've got some sort of tech team on the site you're working for, kind of helping you from a tech perspective. Like, for example, if a site has the ability to auto-moderate certain things, I'm sure, if you're a Twitch streamer at all, sometimes you just turn on auto-mod and now you don't have to worry about certain curse words. That's the sort of thing that also, if you can get someone to implement some automated solutions, then you can save the moderator some time and some energy, right? So like, we don't need a moderator to look at every time someone's posting some spam link to a sketchy site, right? But if you don't do some tech work to make sure that happens, then that's who has to do it. And now you've got a bunch of busy work that you're giving to people.
Absolutely. No, that makes sense. Let's, thank you, Anita, for, like going through the chat for us so we can pay attention to the folks who are there. There's another question there. I want to ask you this question, but then I also want you to talk specifically about Giant Bomb. You've mentioned it, but we haven't really gotten into like the specifics of who Giant Bomb is, what Giant Bomb does, but before we get to that, I did want to ask, somebody had a question about finding like a mod. Like, how do you find people to do this moderation work? Because I'm guessing most of this it's free work, it's free labor, right? And then,
Most of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. But are certain things that you can like look out for? So let's say if you were to have like a job description, what might be some of those things that are there? But some folks are just asking what's like a way to see if people are interested in like moderation work other than just like chatting them up and seeing if they would be like a fit. Are there any best practices for folks in the chat?
Yeah, I think that, there's no substitute for talking to someone and seeing how they behave. I would say one thing that you should be cautious about is the person who is your biggest fan is not necessarily your best moderator. Just because someone's available and willing to do the work, if it needs to be done, like maybe you don't have a choice and you have to go with the first person who's offering. But Um, I think you want to actually have a process where you're vetting the people who you're entrusting with the vibe of your community, be it your Twitch chat, be it your website. You want to make sure that the person that you're empowering is someone who is going to carry your values, because at the end of the day, you can write all the rules you want. There will always be exceptions. There will always be edge cases, and you're going to want someone who's going to err on the side that you believe your community should be taken. So I think that you want to, like earlier when I said people who are community members of the community in good standing for a long period of time, who are doing work that you think is valuable, or who are making good comments, like evidence of being a good member of the community and always staying within the bounds that you want is a good sign that they at least understand where the rules are and where they should be. Someone who's going to be willing to have a conversation with you and talk about moderation is generally someone who will at least be open to the idea of doing this work. I tend to think that people who are reaching out and saying, please give me this power, are not necessarily the people who you want to have it. I prefer like finding the folks who are just doing good work and don't expect the reward and then give it to them, rather than someone who's volunteering. Even though sometimes you need the work done, and you gotta give the power to who's asking for it. But sometimes you can end up with folks who just shouldn't be in charge of things. It turns out if you have to apply for power, sometimes you're not good at wielding it. Who knew?
That's a tweet right there. Somebody needs to tweet that. That was absolutely on point. Tell us about Giant Bomb.
Sure. It's a website about video games.
Tell us about it.
Yeah. So it's a video game website founded by former members of GameSpot for the most part, about now 10 years ago. Oh no, I'm aging. Yeah, so they have some review coverage. They've moved a lot more towards video and personality-driven coverage in the last 10 years. Like there were a lot more reviews on the site before, but most of the community stuff comes up around their podcast. The Giant Bombcast and the Giant Beastcast are kind of the flagships, and those are kind of where most of the comments come from. It's where most of the community is centered around. And yeah, the site's just generally for people who like games and like chatting about them. There's generally, I mean, in some ways, the site kind of pioneered the Let's Play with the community endurance run, or the endurance run, the original endurance run. But yeah, one thing that I wanted to talk about specifically about Giant Bomb is because it has like I said, we have a wiki, and we also have community like forums and chat and stuff like that. So the wiki actually requires different levels of moderation than other parts of the site, because the wiki is subject to things like right to be forgotten laws. And so in certain countries, you have the ability to ask for content that mentions you, pictures of you. They have to legally be removed from a site's servers if you request it. And so that's something that comes up semi-regularly for our wiki mods. If someone has a harassment campaign against them, they might not want their stuff posted anywhere anymore. And so for sites that don't have a legal department to go to, being familiar with all the regulations for an international site can be tough. Thankfully, Giant Bomb's owned by CBS, and we have a good relationship with members of the staff to kind of put us in contact. And situations where, hey, this person's saying something that maybe the authorities need to know about, like that sort of stuff can be raised. Other sites don't necessarily have that. Like they don't have a legal department. They don't know what the laws are in all the countries where they operate. So that's something that I think goes untalked about. We're still, even if it's video games and it's something that you might think is just fun and games, they are subject to international laws. So knowing that your moderators kind of are the first line of defense on making sure that those things are obeyed, you need to make sure that if you're not going to train them on every single law of every single country that you're operating in, you give them liaisons who are going to be able to tell them, oh yeah, we need to take that down. Like it's not like if you can get to it, please take down this page. No, we need to take it down now because a request was made. It's binding. We need to do it.
Absolutely. My feminist senses were tingling, like whenever you mentioned that the right to be forgotten laws, right? And I
Hmm.
remember being like talking, uncovering this like in some like international organizing we were doing like around like Me Too and stuff, right?
Hmm.
Um, and it's so interesting because like we like to keep receipts. We will keep receipts on somebody from like their earliest days until they're 60 years old, and we will bring those receipts up like all the time. So I think it was such an interesting thing like for us to like grapple with, especially allowing people to like be different than who they may have been like previously and like start over and get like a clean slate. So that's something that we've actually had to like like grapple with like in our communities, especially with like call out culture and cancel culture, especially when things are
Hmm.
uncovered, like when receipts are discovered like about a person. So I was thinking, thank you for bringing that up because these are things that we all do have to like engage with.
Yeah,
We
that's
probably
something
have.
that
Go ahead.
that oh no, that's something that totally comes up like when I was talking about having a history of moderation, who's been moderated and what they've done in the past. Like if you see someone who's was moderated most recently 5 years ago, but they said something real bad 5 years ago, maybe we let it go. It's not like this is your third strike. You said two bad things 5 years ago, so now you're done. So it's important to also have that leniency with moderation because it's video games. Sometimes people get into a video game site when they're 13, and now it's 10 years later and they're a different person. So allowing people the space to grow and develop is also part of having a good community. A good community is one that you can grow into and stay in.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a couple other quick questions. I know we are winding down, so I'll allow other folks who are in the chat. If you all want to participate in this conversation, please submit your questions now. We can spend a few moments getting to them. Captain Mochi is asking another question around paying moderators, and around like your thoughts on paying moderators, especially like for some of the smaller platforms that maybe don't have like the means to do so. So you want to talk about what you all do related to like paying moderators and maybe what structurally we could do to compensate folks for this work.
Yeah, I mean, I could say like John, we're community volunteer moderators, so we're not getting paid. I think that if have your expectations set to what you're going to pay people. If it's a job, if it's a real job, it's a paid job. If it's a volunteer thing, and people are going to the lengths of making it like a real job, I hope that if you're not paying them in money, you're giving them something that's worth their time. Because love of your site is not an inexhaustible resource, and you will burn moderators out if you're going to be in a spot where there's no real incentive for them to keep doing extra labor for you. So thankfully, we have a good relationship with the staff. We have a good set of moderators, and there are things that help offset the lack of pay. But if you're in a position where you can pay for moderators and make sure that it's a real job, like it's real work. We have people based all over the world so that we have coverage all the time. We coordinate if people are going to be gone for a while. Like that's stuff that you would expect from people who are being compensated. So like,
Mhm.
I think that if you're in a spot to do it, please do. If you're not in a spot to do it, you should have an understanding that that labor that you're asking for is not permanent and should not be expected to be. And whatever you can do to make it compensated in some way, even if you can't pay with money, if you can do something for those folks, I think it's definitely worth it. I think there's a moral obligation. So like,
Mhm.
please do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Another question. Backseat Wonder is asking about, the crisis mode, crisis communication, right? Like when something bad is happening, like in the moment, bot
Hmm.
attacks, or and having to maybe like they say having to contact like Amazon immediately, so or other whatever like the spaces that may host like some of these sites. Like, what do you do when you have to like address that urgent moment? Like
I'd say
all hands need to be on deck. Go ahead.
Yep. So first off, again, look at your tool chest. If you're a site that can extend the post time between posts, if you're getting spam, if you have some sort of auto mod you can deploy, if you can turn off whatever features being hijacked, like those are things. But usually as a moderator, if you're not a member of the site, you might not have access to the backdoor to actually look and see, hey, here's a feature I can turn off. I can identify who the bad actors are. Um, this is something that's generally out of like a regular community moderator's hands. You need to raise that to staff. You need to raise that to ultimately their tech support and their liaison with Amazon Web Services. Like you can just mitigate the damage. So when you're in mitigation mode, you generally want all hands on deck. You want as many people looking at whatever the feature is that's blowing up, be it that, there's a bunch of people posting that are acting in bad faith and being harmful to other people. Maybe it's mass PMs that, someone's sending out threats or something like that. You want everyone to be in the loop. You want to make sure that everyone's focused on whatever the problem area is. You want to raise it to the tech person who actually can hopefully throw some more authoritative and more powerful responses into place. And then you want to just try to mitigate it for as long as you can. Understand that if you're a community person, you might not be able to handle all of it yourself. If that's the case and it's unmoderatable, it's uncontrollable, maybe it's better to turn off the thing than to deal with the damage and just let it go on, depending on what the problem is, right? Like if it's a DDoS attack, your site's down. Like there's no moderation that's going to fix that. But as a moderator, you're probably the person online who's like, hey, the site's down. Or like, hey, there's a problem with posting. All of a sudden I can't post. What's up? So you tend to be the first line of like, hey, there's a bug with the site, as well as, hey, there's a big problem here. There's a bunch of posters who weirdly all have the same avatar and keep saying the same stuff. I don't know.
Absolutely. We know those users. Okay. Another question from Lael. Hopefully, forgive me if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. How do you manage giving people the space to grow and develop? So going back to like our conversation about keeping receipts and, right to be forgotten, kind of laws, like how do you allow people to like come back from being like a previously bad actor? Is there a way to like assess like, okay, you passed the test now, you're a good person, or like, how do you do that? How do you allow people to come back? Is there like a truth and reconciliation process to allow folks back in?
Sure. So one thing that we do that I think is important is that we don't publicly air moderation. If your comment got deleted, no one knows about it except you and the mod team, at least on Giant Bomb. Unless you do something to make it public, we're not going to talk about it. If people ask about it, we're not going to say it. So we know that something has happened, but regular other users don't necessarily know what your history is. Unless you've dealt with this person over a long period of time, you're not going to necessarily know, which means that it gives people the opportunity to grow just organically, right? We don't know that you've got a rap sheet, so who cares, right? You're just another person. If you had a problem 9 years ago, no one knows about it. So by keeping the moderation stuff between the mods and the people who have been moderated, and we always try to phrase moderation as, hey, you violated the rules of this community. That doesn't mean you're a bad person. Maybe you misunderstood the rules. You need to decide whether you want to be a member of this community. Do you want to follow the standards that we have for everyone who's acting here, that we feel helps people feel the most at home and the most respected? If you're not going to do that, like eventually you're going to reveal that you're not going to do that, and you're going to do it over time, and it'll resolve itself. But for people who stay in the community who don't ever cross that threshold, by keeping that stuff anonymous and keeping it between the mods and the other person, it allows people to just kind of demonstrate through their actions that they've learned, right? We're not going to kick you out if we think that you're learning and you're growing. And if you slip up, like I said, like if we found someone who crossed the line 7 years ago, or they crossed the line 3 years ago, and they're crossing the line in a different way, or they're crossing the line in a minor way that we're not going to consider very egregious, we'll let them stay in the community. We'll just say, hey, that thing you said's over the line again. We've talked to you about this before. Please, pay attention. Please be considerate of other people. And otherwise, it's fine. But yeah,
Absolutely.
that's what I would recommend. Like,
Awesome.
You don't need to have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission if no one else knows that something's wrong. And ultimately, we're not the cops. Like, there's nothing we can do outside of saying you can't post in like these very specific websites and very specific spots in the website. So you also don't need to think like, oh man, if I ban someone, or oh man, if I give them a warning, this is a horrible set of handcuffs I'm putting on them. Like, it's something that's for the community as a whole. Like, no one person is bigger than everyone else's experience in your site.
Awesome. I love that. That's actually a perfect segue to ending. Hopefully, Anita, I'm not sure if there are other comments or other questions, but I think that's like a beautiful segue to like end on. And, I did want to see if you had other things, Gino, that you may have wanted to like discuss, things that we didn't ask you, things, folks you want to shout out, anything that you need to put out there. Want to make sure to give you space to do that.
Oh, sure. So in terms of things we didn't discuss, I think we covered pretty much all the things for moderation. Take care of your mods. Understand that if you see a screenshot of someone getting moderated, they have the ability to crop it. So if someone suddenly shows up in your forum saying, "Hey, this person was totally rude and mean, and I was banned for no reason," that line about no one knows about the moderation except you and the mod team, that is also true about whether you get banned and what the causes were for it. So if someone shops you around a screenshot of someone being very mean to them for no reason, maybe question if they've been doing things over a period of years that built up little by little and made us decide that, hey, maybe they shouldn't be posting anymore. Also, maybe think about if all of a sudden someone is saying something really inflammatory and then someone all of a sudden shows up out of nowhere with 0 posts and agrees with them. Maybe it's the same person. Sometimes it's because they know how the site works as well as you do, and that can come up. If all of a sudden a post that seems to have no likes just gets bumped for out of nowhere, same thing. So try to think about how these systems interact with each other, and that we all have access to snipping tools. It comes with Windows. So yeah, I would say moderators are mostly doing unpaid work, and they're trying to make the community a better place for everyone. I'm sure everyone has an experience that they would hold out and say, this was a bad experience or this was a good experience, but try to understand that we're just trying to do our best 9 times out of 10. In terms of stuff to plug, giantbomb.com, cool website. I still frequent it because I, moderate for the site. It's a cool place. I think other stuff, my podcast, Deep Listens, it's a fun weekly book club I do with some of my friends. We just play a video game, talk about it, just like a regular old book club. We just did Night Trap. That game's not good. That game's bad, but important but bad. So if the way I talk is in any way interesting to you, that is, I host that show. And if you want to check out any of my writing, like I have some of it linked on my Twitter, which is @thatpenguino. I'm really proud of the Final Fantasy IX piece that I think if it's not linked on it was linked for a long time. If you look it up on Giant Bomb, I think it's probably one of the first articles that you came up with. It was a piece I wrote about Final Fantasy IX and the passing of my grandfather. So it's something that I feel really passionate about. And if you want to know what I'm about, that's kind of the thing to read.
Awesome. I love that. Gino, thank you so much for taking time with us. Anita, I want to bring you on back in here. Thank you again for making space for us to be able to have this conversation. Thank you for the folks who were in the chat on Twitch. So you folks are amazing for engaging in this conversation and allowing this conversation to be amazing and fruitful. Hopefully you all got something from it. Anita, are you there? I want to bring you on.
Yeah, I'm back and you're sweet. I can't hear you anymore, though. Man, it was getting so spicy there at the end. I feel like we just got started. All these hot takes about video games and snipping tools. And yeah, man, that was delightful. Thank you, both of you, for having that conversation with us. Please go check out Gino's podcast, Deep Listens Pod, and definitely check out Kishonna's book, Intersectional Tech, that just came out very, very recently about Black users in digital gaming. If you care about video games, you will love this book. Thanks. Appropriately, thanks to our mods for keeping this space friendly. Our mods are wonderful. They've been an organic part of our community, which has always needed a little extra love and support. And it means a lot to me that folks want to come in and engage with this space and help us keep it a little bit safer. You can watch... and thank all of you for tuning in, which I really appreciate. You popping in every week and listening to our amazing guests that we have gotten for y'all to give you some good tips. If you want to see if you want to see this video or any of the videos from our previous shows, you can do that at Games Hotline. What am I saying, man? I'm so distracted now. youtube.com/gameshotline. You can also see him on our website at gameshotline.org. There's so many ways to engage with us. Now, just a quick reminder, the Games Hotline is a free resource for everyone. It is providing emotional support to folks in the games industry, people who play games, fans, and we want to be there for them as much as we possibly can. So if you want to help us keep it free, please chip in a few bucks at gameshotline.org/donate. All right, y'all. Join us next week when we're going to have Kishonna back on to talk to Jose Hernandez about accessibility in competitive gaming. I am so excited about this. So join us next week. Bye.